Thanks, Josh. Have you ever had someone in your life you were super proud of and wanted to brag on? For those of you who are parents, you definitely have had moments like this. And for those of you who are grandparents, you're even worse. I am at the age now where I have a lot of friends. I have 2 grandbabies. I won't show their picture on the screen or anything. However, I have to say, I am at the age where all my friends are starting to have grandkids. And so I cannot tell you how often we're together and the conversation turns to grandchildren and the bragging rights begin. And there are pictures flown about and there are stories told. Everyone thinks their grandchild is the most special grandchild. And so this often happens. I think we sometimes have someone in our life that we brag on because we love them so. And other times we have someone in our life that we like to brag about because they've made an impact on us. They've changed us. I remember being a little kid going to school, and I had separation anxiety, so school was kind of a terrifying experience for me as a little kid. And when I went to first grade, that's the first time, I had to go to school full time. We didn't have full-time kindergarten. It was half day and stuff. So that wasn't too bad. I could stomach that. Going to school full time the first day, every night before school started, I would feel anxiety, butterflies in my stomach, churning. Get up in the morning, still churning, nervous. Get to school, and I had a teacher named Miss Shaw. First of all, she was just a lovely lady. She was just super, super sweet. And she knew that I must have been struggling with anxiety and fear. And that lady made school a safe place for me. I can remember the very first teachers' conference because I wanted to introduce my mother to Miss Shaw. Because Miss Shaw loved me. I remember my first report card. I still remember what she wrote to my mother on my first report card. I have fallen in love with your little boy. Always easy for me to brag on someone who makes a difference in my life. And today, I want to talk to you about Jesus. Listen, you just need to know, no one has made the impact on my life that Jesus has. There's no one like him. He is the most beautiful, most compelling, most important person in my life. And that's why it's always easy for me to talk to you about Jesus. And I want to talk to you about Jesus today. I want to give you a perspective on Jesus. Listen, some of you grew up in church. You've heard about Jesus your whole life. I want you to turn it all off for a second. I want you to hear like you're hearing for the first time. Some of you may never have gone to church. You may not know much about Jesus. I want you to turn off all your biases. And I want you to listen like you're listening for the first time. And I just want to talk to you about Jesus through my own life and the scriptures. And I want to talk to you about the most important person I know. I will tell you that I grew up going to church. And you know what? So I started hearing Jesus when I was little, and it didn't make a lot of difference in my life. One of the problems when it becomes super familiar to you is you really know about but don't know sometimes. And that was true for me. But when I was 17 years old, I started dating a girl at church, which I will say for the first time in my life, church was interesting. It had nothing to do with church, but she was interesting. But when I was 19, we broke up. I drove away and I wept on the side of the road, just said to the Lord, I gave this girl entrance into my life and look what happened. And, that's one of the things about going to church. You know during times of crisis who to call out to. And when I called out to Jesus, I have to say I was super surprised because I heard his voice. It was not audible. But God spoke to me interior world in my heart and I knew he was talking to me. And he simply said to me, "It's the same way you've treated me your whole life." I had an image of Jesus, by the way, in this thing. And I saw in this picture, Jesus was standing there, and I was literally pushing him out to the edges of my life. And as I saw this image, I realized, like, I had pushed Jesus out of my life because I was the center of my life. I'd rejected him. And it broke my heart. I looked at his face in this image. It was so clear. And I could see his tenderness, his love for me. And I just surrendered my life at that point to Jesus. I just said, "Jesus, from now on, I'm going to follow you." And my whole life completely changed. I have to tell you, in that moment, I felt Jesus' love like as real as anybody's love that I had ever experienced in my life. And I literally went to work the next day. I was in college, working my way through college. I walked into the workplace. A woman who was also a follower of Jesus in the workplace looked at me from across the room 100 feet away, and she said, "You had an encounter with God. Come tell me about it." My whole face had changed. That was my introduction to Jesus. Before that, I had heard about him. But that day, I met him. And it began this journey of transformation in my relationship with Jesus. I want to tell you one of my favorite passages of Jesus. If you have a Bible with you, or a Bible app, if you're one who has a Bible app on your phone, you want to look at Matthew chapter 12, verses 20 and 21. This is Matthew, one of Jesus' followers, quoting an Old Testament passage that is referring to a description of Jesus who was yet to come. It was a prophecy, a prediction that Jesus was coming. And this was the description of Jesus that Matthew used. Listen to these words, Matthew chapter 12, verses 20 and 21. "A bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, until he has brought justice through to victory. In his name, the nations will put their hope." I just want to pull this apart with you for a second. First of all, notice the description. It's a word picture. It's describing what Jesus is like. It says, "A bruised reed he will not break." Listen, this is a reed. It's not an oak tree. A giant, strong tree is a huge force, greatly strong. But a reed, you could break it in your hand. But this isn't even a normal, healthy reed. It's a bruised reed. It's a damaged reed. And yet Jesus is so gentle and tender. He won't do further damage to a damaged reed. And I'm just going to tell you, he's really not consumed with reeds. He's talking about broken people with broken hearts and broken lives. This is the Jesus that I know. He's gentle with your pain. He goes on to say, "A smoldering wick he will not snuff out." Again, notice, it's not a bonfire. It's not even a fire in a fireplace. It's not even a candle that is flourishing. It's a candle that is almost extinguished. It's a smoldering wick. And yet his care for it is to nurture the flame, not to snuff it out. Which again, I would argue, he's not really concerned with flames. He's concerned with people's hearts. And sometimes the reality is life has a way of snuffing out and extinguishing your passion in life. And Jesus wants to bring you back to life when you're losing your way. This is who he is. Notice, though, while he's concerned for people who are oppressed, people who are hurting, people who are in pain, which is the first image he gives us, notice the next sentence, "till he has brought justice through to victory." Listen, you have to understand, Jesus is also very concerned about right and wrong. Jesus is incredibly concerned about good and evil. Jesus recognizes that not everything that happens in this world is good, that there's plenty of evil things that happen, and he recognizes that there's plenty of things that happen in the world that are wrong and oppressive to people. And he's not indifferent. There is a day coming, the Bible says, when Jesus will separate out good from evil. He will make rights wrong. He will do that at some point. But in the meantime, he's actually trying to move people's hearts towards goodness, to turn away from hurt and harm of others. Listen, I'll give you an image with this. The thing I know about Jesus is he has compassion on the ones who are oppressed, and he has compassion on the oppressors. And I'll give you an example of this, kind of a story that will help you figure this out. I have a cat. I like him in spite of himself. His name is Muffin, but do not be deceived. He is vicious. He killed a hawk. Yeah, that's right. The mighty Muffin took down a hawk. He's all of 10 pounds, but pound for pound, I'd put Muffin up against any beast in the world. He is a vicious, mighty warrior. He kills everything in sight. I tell my children, if we were unlucky enough to have him be 50 pounds, we would all be dead. Muffin is a fierce hunter. And one day, this was, 2 or 3 years back, my wife decided to join one of these no mow May campaigns. You ever have one of those around here where people don't mow their lawn? I don't really care about that because I don't really like mowing the lawn. So I was super happy for no mow May. I would have been happy for no mow ever campaign. However, May comes by, we let the grass grow, and of course it's springtime in New York, so the grass is knee deep, right? But June comes by, she says, all right, it's time to mow the grass. I'm like, thanks, babe, appreciate that. Now I got to walk through the mower with, all the tall grass. But when I mowed the grass, I discovered we had not one but 2 nests of baby bunnies. Yeah. Now, here was the thing. None of the baby bunnies got hurt by the mower. However, you see, now they're completely exposed. And I've got a mass murdering cat. The thing you have to understand, though, is Muffin was born to be outside. He is no domesticated house cat. He is the mighty hunter. He's the mighty Muffin. And Muffin did not want to be trapped inside. And my children did not want him to be outside because they wanted to protect the baby bunnies, the innocent, tender, little, cute baby bunnies. And if you let Muffin outside, the very first thing he did was make a beeline to the baby bunnies, who he wanted to slaughter one at a time. So I felt bad for the baby bunnies, and I felt bad for Muffin, the mass murderous cat. So literally, I let Muffin out, and I would stand like a centurion on guard over the nest of baby bunnies. And he would come slinking through the bushes to attack, and I'd be like, no, and he'd slink back, and this went on for a month until the bunnies finally, made their way out of the nest. But I tell you, that event helped me understand the heart of Jesus. Listen, can I tell you something? There are times in your life where you're like Muffin and you're doing damage to the people around you. Jesus said the most important thing in the world was to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second was like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And here's the reality. Every single one of us violates the law of love. You've all said things that hurt other people. You've all done things that have hurt other people. Every single one of us in this room, without exception, has violated the most important law of the universe, the law of love. And can you hear me for a second? When you're at your worst and you're hurting people around you, Jesus loves you like I love that dumb mass murdering cat. And when you're at your very best and there's people around you who are oppressing and hurting and wounding you, Jesus is tender with your pain. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not snuff out. See, this is why I love Jesus. There's no one like him. He has the tender heart for the oppressed and the oppressor. I want to talk about Jesus' tenderness with you to just give you a feel for it in 3 ways this morning, okay? First, I want to talk about how Jesus is tender with our sin. when we screw up, when we mess up, like when we violate the law of love. And I just said we all do it. He's tender with our sin. I'll give you an important principle that I've learned about Jesus. Here it is. I'll just give it to you in one sentence. You ready? Jesus has more grace than you have sin. Grace is this capacity of God to be able to forgive even when you mess up. He has more capacity to forgive than you have the ability to screw up. Hey, listen, this is why the message of Jesus is known as good news. Because if I was keeping tabs on my life or I was keeping tabs on your life, I think we'd have a lot of screw-ups along the way. And he's got more grace than we have sin. That's a good news thing for me. I want you to think with me about the Gospels just for a minute. Some of the people that Jesus interacted with, and you can look up these stories on your own later, but there's a story in John chapter 4 about a woman at a well. She's a Samaritan woman. The first thing you need to know about this, Jews and Samaritans don't interact, right? They really hated each other back in Jesus' day. Second thing you have to know is that this woman is at the well at the time when people aren't going to the well by herself. Right away, that's a red flag. Something's off. Normally, in this day and age, the people, the women of the town, would have gone to the well together. It was a community event, but she is not there with the others. Why? Well, the story goes on to unveil why. The answer is because she's lived a promiscuous lifestyle. She has been a serial adulterer. So the women in the town are a little ticked off. And they don't want her in their party. They don't trust her, okay? She's sitting there at the well, and when Jesus comes up, he asks her for a drink. She's taken a little bit back by this because, one, he's a man, and men and women didn't interact in public like that in that society. Two, he's Jewish, she's Samaritan. And she looks at him and says, you, a Jewish man, you're asking me for a drink, a Samaritan woman? And he looks at her and says, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me for a drink, and I would have given you a drink that satisfied. Now, that right there is a typical Jesus approach to life. Here's what he's saying to her. I perceive you are thirsty. You've been looking for something your whole life, and you can't find satisfaction. But I could give you something that'll finally satisfy what your heart is longing for. And then with keen prophetic insight, he says to her, why don't you go get your husband? She's like, I don't have a husband. He goes, that's true. You've actually had 5, and the guy you're living with now is not your husband. And he knows her life. She looks at him and goes, sir, I see you're a prophet. Jesus wasn't condemning her. He's got more grace than you, I, or she have sinned. He's simply showing her he understands where she feels shame. He knows where she's messed up. And he knows how she's been looking for love to satisfy an inner void that she can't satisfy. And he's offering her life. That's who Jesus is. I think about Peter. Peter, the leader amongst the apostles. Peter betrays Jesus. Jesus wasn't surprised by it. Jesus actually predicted it. Multiple times he said to him, you're going to deny me 3 times. He said, before the rooster crows tonight, you'll deny me 3 times. But I love this line he says to Peter. Knowing that Peter would deny him, he says to him, as he's predicting his denial, when you turn back to me, strengthen your brothers. Listen, he's offering them life even as he tells them he's going to mess up. That's who Jesus is. Listen, he knows you're going to mess up before you mess up, and he still loves you. That's the way he is. For me personally, I got married when I was 25. When Jen and I got married, we pretty quickly went into ministry. I started a church in the Boston area. Church was growing. Good things were happening. Jen and I hit a marriage snag. She didn't like me anymore in the midst of this thing, just conflict in the house. And I'm trying to fix this relationship. And, I think pretty typically when you hit conflict sometime, you're focused on the other person, right? And I'm praying, God, fix her, heal her, change her, save her, whatever she needs. But I figured out pretty quickly that you can't fix a relational problem by focusing on the other person's issues. The only way you're ever going to fix a relational problem is to become healthier you. On a scale of 1 to 10, if you're a 3, the healthiest relationship you're ever going to have is a 3. You want to move from a 3 to a 6, there's only one path to get there. You have to change. When I understood that, I knew I needed to change. I came to Jesus and I started to realize, I am not just a victim in this relationship. I'm a contributing factor to the problem. And I can't control anything she's doing, but I can be responsible for my life. And listen, Jesus started showing me stuff that needed to change, stuff I was doing that was hurting Jen. Please hear me. Never once did I feel condemned. He just took me gently by the hand, led me through, and said, hey, let's clean up some of this stuff. And as he started to clean up stuff in my life, my relationship with my wife became really healthy. That's the Jesus I know and love. Listen, he's not showing you what you do wrong to make you feel bad. He's trying to show us when we mess up sometimes so he can extend grace and help us break free, so we can become better people in better relationships. That's the Jesus that I know and love. Listen, let me give you a second thing about Jesus. Not only is he tender with our shortcomings, our failures, our sin, but he's also tenderhearted with our pain and our heartache. Again, as I said to you before with the story about Muffin, all of us have been both perpetrators of pain and victims of pain. We all carry pain. It's just part of life. Nobody lives through this world without carrying some pain and heartache. We've experienced stuff, rejection, betrayal, people insulting us and criticizing us, wounding. It's true for all of us. But it's just true for the human race. Jesus was running into people all the time like this. There's one story that's told about Jesus, about a woman who comes to Jesus. She's sick. She has a flow of blood, an issue of blood. This society, first century, when you had an issue of blood and nobody could figure out what it was and they couldn't make it stop, they were afraid. They were afraid that somehow or another you had a disease that would be communicable. It was going to be caught by other people. So you'd get isolated, right? Social distancing was super popular in the first century. They'd push you off to the side. Even if she came into contact with other people, she had to declare that she was unclean. She literally had to shout as she approached other people, unclean. Just work with me for a second. Imagine every single time you came into contact with other people, you had to shout, unclean. Imagine how it would make you feel. This woman, though, one day, she hears that Jesus is healing people. She doesn't know Jesus. She hasn't apparently met Jesus, but she's got hope that she could be healed. So she sneaks up through the crowd without doing anything, yelling she's unclean. She sneaks in, and all she does is reach out and grab Jesus' garment, just the hem of his garment. But instantly, Jesus feels power leave him, and he knows someone has reached out for healing. And it's this bit of this comic moment. He turns around and he's like, who touched me? Now, you have to understand, everywhere Jesus went, people are pressing all around him and touching him. The guy drew a crowd everywhere. When you're carrying this kind of anointing, teaching, power, wisdom, people gather and press in. So he's like, who touched me? And the disciples are, who's touching you? Everybody's touching you. What are you talking about, boss? And he's like, no, somebody touched me purposely, and they experienced power. They experienced healing. Who touched me? And finally, the woman comes forward. This stealthy garment grabber is a little bit alarmed to come forward. She's shaking. And Jesus looks at her and says, woman, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Listen, I want to pause and say something about the story. I think one of the reasons why Jesus called her forward was because he knew her healing was not just physical. She needed emotional healing for all the wounds of isolation she suffered. Hear me for a second. In a future chapter in this story in the book of Mark, just a couple chapters later, Mark makes this comment in Mark chapter 6 that it was a regular occurrence for people to touch Jesus' clothes and they would experience healing. But never, ever, not one other time in the gospel does he stop, single a person out, and call them forward. He just lets it happen. This is the only time he singles someone out who touches him and receives healing. Why? Because she had been yelling, unclean, for decades. And he knew she needed to be pronounced clean again. That moment for her was deep healing for her isolated, wounded heart. Please hear me. This is the Jesus that I know and love. This is what he's like. This is how I've seen Jesus operate over and over. I went through a season in my life where I was experiencing a lot of attacks. I was preaching a subject that was about revival. It wasn't particularly popular. And as that happened, I started having attacks. I had somebody develop an imaginary Facebook profile, friended everybody in my church. I had probably 1,000 or so people in my church at that point, and they're friending everybody in the church and wrote against me every day for 5 years. I had 6 radio shows done against me in Boston. I had blogs started against me, and it's a prolonged period of time. Listen, I just want to say to you, if you've never been through a prolonged period of public humiliation, you should try it. It's good for the soul if you process it well. In the midst of this thing, I forgave the people that were doing this stuff against me. A bunch of people, of course, left the church in that kind of a season. And it had calmed down, and I had worked through the season. I thought I was doing okay. And one Sunday morning, I had an experience, and I met Jesus in a unique way. I was at the end of the service. I was finished speaking, and I was down front just kind of interacting with people. And this woman who had been in our church for many, many years, she came up to me, but she was sobbing uncontrollably and hysterically. I had no idea what happened. I just thought, oh my gosh, something happened to Mary, and I just wrapped her up in a hug and held her in my arms. She had come to start her faith journey at our church. She had become a leader at our church. I knew her real well. I just thought she must be carrying pain. Held her in my arms, and she sobbed. And all of a sudden, through her sobbing, she gasped, I am weeping for you, for the way we've treated you. And when she said it, I just sobbed. We sat there in each other's arms weeping that morning for about 15 minutes. But I got to tell you something, the entire time I sobbed, I could just feel the presence of Jesus' tender love healing my heart. I had forgiven, but the heart still gets hurt by people's painful choices against us. And we need to know Jesus' tender healing. Just like the woman who grabbed the hem of his garment, every one of us has these moments. Here's the good news. Jesus is tender, a bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, and he can heal your wounds. One last thing about Jesus, and then I'm done. The last thing I want to say is Jesus also heals the sick. I mean, this is a major part of the Gospels. If you've never read the Gospels, you should really read the Gospels and just get to know Jesus. He is the most compelling, fascinating human that has ever lived. There's no one like him. He's incomparable. And healing is a major, major part of Jesus' life. I'm going to just tell you about one chapter real fast, Matthew chapter 8. The stories in the chapter are just the stories of healing. The first guy comes to him as a leper, first century leprosy, Hansen's disease. These guys would end up with this grotesque disease. They'd lose feeling in their extremity in the disease. A lot of lesions and things like that. They'd get disfigured. But also because they lost their nerve endings, their feelings, they could literally put their hand on a hot stove and not feel their burning flesh burning. They would just smell the flesh, and that's when they'd remove their hand. So as a result, they would lose appendages all the time. So they ended up really disfigured. People were terrified of leprosy. So when lepers would come by, they'd get anywhere near them. They'd stone them, they'd throw rocks at them, they'd spit on them. They were terrified. And once again, because the disease was communicable, they would have to yell, unclean, every time they come in contact. One day, Jesus is walking along and a leper comes near him, but stops at the appropriate distance and yells to him, "Sir, if you are willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus walks over to where the man is, closing the gap on appropriate social distance, reaches out his hand and touches the leper. I guarantee you when he did it, the crowd went, because in the Old Testament, man, you couldn't touch someone like that. In the Old Testament, when the clean came in contact with the unclean, the clean was defiled. You were no longer allowed to participate in worship, things like that. But what happened when Jesus touched the man was his leprosy, his lesions, his skin disease, even his fingers and things that would have been gone grew back. His skin became whole. See, in the New Testament, when the clean touches the unclean becomes clean. That's who Jesus is. He walks on from there and he meets a man. The man is a centurion. He's a Roman soldier. The soldier comes to Jesus and says, "Listen, I have a servant. He's super sick. He's sick unto death. I don't need you to come to my house. I understand the way authority works because I'm a soldier. I tell somebody to do this underneath my command and they do it. I tell them to go there and they go." I said, "All you need to do is speak the word and my servant will be healed." Somehow or another, this guy has made an association between military authority, the ability to command someone to do something, and Jesus' authority over sickness. And he has incredible faith. As a matter of fact, Jesus says, "Never in Israel have I seen such faith like this." And he speaks the word, and the man's servant is healed at that very hour. And then Jesus finishes his day after many healings and all this kind of stuff, and he goes to Peter's house. And Peter has a mother-in-law who's sick. She just has a fever. Listen, it's not even COVID, man. She's just got a cold, okay? But Jesus walks up to her when he finds out she's sick, and he touches her, and immediately her fever leaves. Which this storyline of these 3 healings in a row always reminds me that there's no problem too big for Jesus to resolve, and there's no problem too small for Jesus to care. That's who he is. Listen, I got one more story for you, and then I'm going to pray with you, but last story. A number of years ago, I was in New York. I was doing one of these weekends, one of these Holy Spirit weekends, and on Sunday morning, a woman, because we were doing a healing service, a woman came to church who had never been to church a day in her life. She was 30 years old. She had never been to church. She had cancer, and it was obvious she had cancer. She had no hair and all the, sort of ill effects that cancer has on your body when you look at somebody in that stage. She told me that, the doctors had told her there was nothing left they could do, and she was on her final months. She didn't know anything about Jesus, but I gave a talk similar to this one about who Jesus is, what he's like, and the fact that he heals. And I walked over to her after the message, and I laid my hand on her with her permission. And I just said to her, I said, "Listen, you just need to understand, I don't have any magic. I can't make anything happen. I don't have the ability to heal sick bodies. I got nothing. I'm human, just like you." But I said, according to the scriptures, Jesus is alive. He rose from the dead. And even though he's not physically right here with us in the room right now, he is present with us right now. And I said, "I'm just going to invite him to come and touch your body." And I said, I'm not going to say anything after that. I'm just going to wait with you on Jesus. I said, this is how it works. If Jesus shows up, you got a shot. No matter what I pray, if Jesus doesn't show up, you got no chance. So I'm just going to invite Jesus. And that was it. Here was my whole prayer. Come, Lord Jesus. I waited a little bit, and, I checked in with her in a few minutes because I wanted to see what she was doing. I said to her, "What are you experiencing? Are you experiencing anything?" And she said, "I feel like my whole body is on fire." Now hear me, she has no way of knowing this, but having done this for a long time, I can tell you one of the things that happens when Jesus shows up with physical healing often is people will feel heat in their body. She doesn't know. She's never been to church a day in her life. I said, that's Jesus. She started weeping. Then I got a word from the Lord. I sensed Jesus speaking to me, and I relate it to her. I said, I'm sensing from Jesus that men have not been kind to you. I knew she had been sexually abused. And as I whispered, she just wept again. And I said to her, Jesus will always be kind with your pain. Listen, that young lady ended up getting healed. She ended up deciding to follow Jesus. And that pastor of that church this week just sent me a picture. This has been years down the road. Just sent me her picture this summer. She got baptized to commit her life to follow Jesus. And she's been walking with Jesus, healed and whole now for many years. That is the Jesus that I know. That's the Jesus that I love. Listen, 2 implications of this. Number 1, if you're here today and you've never made a decision to follow Jesus, some of you have known about him, but you haven't really known him intimately, closely. You haven't walked with him. I want to say 2 things to you. 1, today is a great day to make Jesus the center of your life. For too long, man, I had Jesus at the edges of my life. I even went to church. I even read my Bible sometimes. I prayed sometimes, but Jesus wasn't really integral to my life. He was off on the side. And if you're here today and you've never decided to follow Jesus, I want to encourage you to make a decision today. Choose. Just like the disciples had to choose. I had to choose. That girl that got healed up in upstate New York, she had to choose to follow Jesus. So make that choice today. This is who he is. It's what he's like. Second, this morning, if you're here and you need healing of any sort, emotionally or physically, I want to give you an opportunity to respond. I'm just going to have you stand where you are, and I'm going to pray for you. But if you need healing, would you just stand up where you are? Part of responding to Jesus is to step out in faith. And as an act of faith, I just want you to stand and say, I need healing, that's all, to Jesus. And I'm just going to give you a second to respond in faith like that. Some of you are near someone right now who stood up just as an act of gentle support. Would you just stand next to them, put your hand on their shoulder? If they, if you don't know them, you might ask permission to do that. But if they're your friend, I think you're okay. And I'm just going to pray. I want you to just fix your eyes spiritually here on Jesus. In other words, turn your attention towards Jesus. Jesus, you are with us, even here and now in this moment. You died, but you rose again. You said after your resurrection to your disciples that you were with them always from that point on. Because you're now here with us in spirit. I just ask Jesus, your spirit would come across and upon our bodies and our hearts and minister loving, healing touch wherever we need it. For some of us, Lord, with wounded hearts, I pray your love, just like living water, would cleanse and wash our wounds. Let your love spill over into our inner being. Let it be soothing, gentle, healing. Let your peace rest upon us Jesus, you are called the Prince of Peace. You're never nervous. Sometimes when we carry wounds, we carry angst. And now, Jesus, I just pray your peace over the hearts of the wounds that we carry. And then, Lord, for some of us here, we have physical pain, physical needs. So often, Lord, when you walk the earth, you would walk up to people in physical pain, touch them, and there was healing. So I just ask you to do it again. Reach out your hand from heaven and touch where there's pain, disease, cancer in our bodies. And let the life of Christ flow to the place that needs healing. Let your risen presence bring victory over the disease in our body. I just pray you'd release your restorative presence over us this morning, Jesus. Restore our hearts, our souls, and our bodies. And may these folks all know how deeply you love them. I pray it in your name, Jesus. Amen.